Thank you. And a reminder that the Cannabis Alliance is a nonprofit organization. We do rely on membership in order to be able to do all of the hard work that we do on behalf of the industry. So if you're not a member, please consider becoming one. Our memberships are as cheap as $20 a month, which is incredibly low for most organizations. We also do $10 a month if you are a bud tender, work in the industry, or a veteran. And frankly, if you can't afford it, but you want to participate, we do scholarships for people. You can come and volunteer at events like this and let your voice be heard, become a part of the Alliance, and help us to really create a vital, ethical, equitable, and sustainable industry in this state. Thank you guys for everything you do. I really appreciate it. Our keynote closing speaker, sponsored by Washington Bud Company, Dr. Sue Sisley.
Thank you so much. It's a terrific day. I learned so much from everybody, and Dodger's getting excited now. Wow, look at them, ready for the cocktail hour. All right, I'm going to dive right in because I know I'm standing between us and the reception here. So let me see if I can. I'm going to just go over some basics, and I'll be around tonight too if you guys want to hit me up with some additional questions. But as we talked about, Scottsdale Research Institute, we're a nonprofit. We focus on FDA clinical trials only because our work has been informed by the veterans community. So we learned from veterans that they weren't able to change policies within the VA unless they had that gold standard RCTs that would actually move the needle for them. So we chose 15 years ago, we decided to focus only on smoked and vaporized dry flower. We really care. We value whole, intact bud, and we don't want it ruined by the ways the government has done that. So you can see our, I don't know if you can see on that screen, but our focus of our research has started in PTSD, right? We were looking at inhaled cannabis flower for treating the symptoms of PTSD, not curing it, just trying to see if we could provide symptom control. Those studies were good, but disappointing that they didn't reach this bar. And I'll talk about how they missed the bar of beating placebo sufficiently. So ultimately, we decided to expand because we were hearing in the PTSD trials with these veterans, they were reporting, just as a side benefit, that they were able to get off their opioids during a 5-week trial with cannabis. And this was with government cannabis, that they were finding that they had lost interest in their opioids, or that the cannabis itself was managing their pain sufficiently, that they no longer needed it. So we began kind of re-engineering the research to look also at cannabis for treating pain and PTSD, and then a secondary measure of opioid substitution, right? And that's why I was telling you guys earlier about why we need to talk to the 12-step community about this, because the data is so impressive already. But you can see here, the reason we've focused on whole cannabis dry bud is because, first of all, it's still the most popular form of cannabis, especially among the veterans community. They love flower. They love, the more vibrant, the more terpene rich, the better. It's still, I was going to say that it's for sure the least expensive, obviously, without the processing. It has the potential to be, if it were ever a pharmaceutical, it would certainly be able to beat out for costs, things like Epidiolex, which is now $38,000 a year is what my patients pay for. I mean, they don't pay, they pay a copay, and then the insurance companies pay for that. But I think the most important thing I want to get across, though, is that the reason we focus on flower is because we hope it'll open other doors for other botanical medicines, right? If we can get the green leafy substance through the FDA, that suddenly they will be forced to start looking at other whole plant, whole mushroom as medicine, right? But the ultimate goal is to get to FDA approval so that we can finally get health insurance coverage for this material, for whole flower. And, so now we're 15 years later, we're still at phase 2. We still have not even gotten to phase 3 yet. And so you can see why I'm getting so disheartened with the FDA and the way they're blocking this work. So as Burl mentioned, we did the first randomized controlled trial in the world looking at cannabis for treating PTSD in a controlled trial. There have been lots of observational studies done that were all positive, so we knew we were on the right track. But we really wanted to advance the mission of the veterans and try to get this into, closer to FDA approval. So we go the study. Oh, I'm not gonna make you. I don't know if you can play any audio. Oh, that's don't worry about that. But I was just going to tell you that this was actually the study that got me fired from the U of A, this controlled trial. And so even though we had FDA approval, and this is why I was showing the Sanjay Gupta, after I got terminated, I started getting interviewed by these folks who cared about the attack on scientific freedom. They felt that the university dismissing a trial that had FDA approval, DEA licensing, government money, and approved by the university IRB was so shocking to people that they would do that. But that was a time, that was back in 2013 when when it was a different tone back then, and it was a red state, Arizona. So, but I want to show you that it ended up taking us 7 years to get that clinical trial underway. A part of it was getting fired, but only a small part. It was really only took us about another year to find a new lab in the private sector and do all that. But I want to just show you, this is the regulatory pathway for doing clinical trials on cannabis in the US. This is what every scientist is up against, regardless of what state you're in. You've got to hurdle. Each of these boxes represents different agencies that you have to get approved. So you have to have the most serious perseverance, and a lot of the university faculty will look at something like this and run the other direction, just because they don't, if you're in a publish or perish system, you're not going to try to embark on this. It's impossible. But if you do have the tenacity, you can get through, and there are literally hundreds of excellent randomized controlled trials that have already been published in peer-reviewed journals, many of them coming out of CMCR, the group at UCSD and UCSF. So I want to just show you, I'm going to jump to the end, the punchline here on our veterans trial, because I want to show you the problem with clinical trials in the US. So after 7 years of battling the government, we finally get the study underway. And 3 years later, we unblind the data, and it's a negative trial. Shows that, cannabis did do better than placebo, but not enough better, right? So you've got to be, in order to be statistically significant, and I know you can't read this, but I'm just going to show you here, the placebo response in these 35% of the patients got better from placebo, and the high THC arm was 44% response. So better, but not enough better by, the statistical power of a study and by the IRB FDA standards. So this is the tough thing, and why we may never be able to get whole plant, whole mushroom, whatever you're talking about, through the FDA processes, because this is so difficult. The placebo response rate in all trials, but especially when it comes to pain or PTSD, the placebo response is so high, and there are techniques that we use to try to reduce that, but they don't always work. I mean, these patients respond to, just being, the structure of being in a trial, the sense of community, of coming each week and being greeted by kind people who are, talk nicely to them. And so it is very tough to do these trials. And I want you to know what we're up against here. And part of the reason why I'm not sure that I'm starting to lose hope that we'll ever be successful in getting this all the way through the entire FDA process. But you can see here, this is in the face of observational trials like this. My colleague George Greer in New Mexico did a very rigorous study, not a controlled trial, observational study, but still 70, he demonstrated in these veterans who took cannabis from the New Mexico program daily that a 75% reduction in CAPS score. CAPS is the gold standard for measuring severity of PTSD. And, I couldn't achieve a 75% reduction in PTSD severity with, the prescriptions I write for patients every day. No way. I might, with Paxil, Zoloft, benzos, I may get them, 20, 30% better, but I'm never going to get them to that. So these are the kind of, there's another study just recently out of Denver. This is my colleague, Dr. Von Miller, 150 subjects, super rigorous study design, but again, observational. Because this is the issue. They were allowed to use real world cannabis, right? They're buying cannabis from the dispensaries in Denver and using it and getting extraordinary results, like way better than I could ever imagine. But again, the government is allowed to dismiss these as being biased because you don't have a placebo, you don't have any, harsh experimental design around it. But so the difference is that they are using the gorgeous, robust cannabis that you guys are manufacturing here in your state and not the NIDA cannabis. So what Burl mentioned earlier, the University of Mississippi has enjoyed a government enforced monopoly since 1968. So over 50 years, they have been the sole supplier of every single cannabis trial in the US. And you can see the pictures on the one side. I'll show you better pictures of this, but that is the really depressing, anemic cannabis that we've been forced to use all this time. Here it is. It comes in these, these are packages that have been frozen in the Research Triangle in Bethesda for years. They sit in the lockers there. They finally get shipped out when a scientist manages to get some money to do a study, which is pretty hard. But you can see these packages come, there's no information on them. Like normally you get a study drug, there's a whole drug master file telling you all no, all you get here is the THC to CBD ratio. That's it. I know nothing else about it. This is what it looks like when you take it out. Looks like, the veterans say it looks like lawnmower clippings. It's pretty disappointing. And then the only other paper in the box is a disclaimer here. I'm going to focus in on it. This disclaimer says this product may be contaminated with mold and other microbials and should be irradiated prior to using. So they make me remediate the cannabis that they, have grown at the University of Mississippi. And this is what, very disheartening for, investigate. Like there's a lot of oncologists that are dealing with immunocompromised patients in a cancer study, and they don't want to they call me and they say, what are we supposed to do with this? And what do they mean irradiate it? And, they don't know how to handle this. So, so here, then you, on the flip side, you're talking about the really stunning cannabis that you guys are making. We're rich with trichomes. And then this is what I'm getting is Ziploc bags full of powder. I mean, it's really pulverized, buds full of stems, sticks, leaves. This is, I know you're not going to be able to hear the audio. Don't worry about the audio. I just wanted to show you. Oh, you got some. Oh, okay. Powder. show you guys that we've been very lucky that a lot of media outlets have been willing to cover this. It's a complicated subject with the whole NIDA monopoly, and but you can see these pictures when our very first cannabis, it came in these rolled cigarettes, and you unroll them, you can see the stems and sticks, and they're just very poorly trimmed bud that then is pulverized into a powder so it can be homogeneous and really hard to smoke or vaporize. Anyway, this is a contract that the government sends out to every scientist who wants who needs the cannabis from Mississippi. You have to sign this document before they'll ship you any cannabis. And it basically says that you will hold the government harmless if there are any adverse events associated with the marijuana, that you can see here, it basically says, I am accepting all legal liability for the bad events that happen from this. And so, the attorneys, this was a study sponsored by MAPS, and they were like, well, we can't sign, this is terrible, we're not going to accept this. But you realize that you cannot get your study drug. And for 50 years, your study would be screwed. If you couldn't get the drug, there was nowhere else you could go to get it. So this is a very tricky thing that the government does, of forcing you to sign this. But I just want to, point out, this is the dilemma here. You got real world flower versus government flower, and how this very shrewd, the government really found a way to sabotage studies for years and years by making this the only supplier. So eventually we found a way around, because we were in the middle of trying to find. I remember MAPS had sued the government over this about 20 years ago. Lyle Craker had and they won, and then they lost on appeal. So the monopoly continued at Mississippi. So I tried to work with this pharma company in Canada to import flower. I thought there's one way to work around the Mississippi monopoly. And I did. I managed to get cannabis brought in. We got our import license. And then suddenly this press release, which you can't read, says that the Canadian cannabis was contaminated with 3 different mycotoxins. And we had to stop the study because, it got recalled by Health Canada. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. We can't win here. This is terrible. And it was very low quality cannabis too, not to disparage Canada, but it was pretty disappointing. So then we go back to the government. There's a letter, we had about a dozen bipartisan letters written from Congress to the DOJ, the DEA, imploring them to end this monopoly and license other growers for research. But none of those letters did anything. The folks in the government didn't even bother to respond to them. They cared so little what the Congress had to say. So ultimately, we ended up suing. And that's when Burl mentioned that we had gotten our license. This was a long process. It took almost 3 years. A team of very dedicated young attorneys who agreed to, take hold of this. And we were in DC Circuit Court. We were in Ninth Circuit. This is them, especially Dodger. He was the most courageous, I would say. But eventually we started to break through. And one of the things that I think you'd be surprised about is that our litigation uncovered some secret memos between DOJ and DEA. DEA was actively trying to end the monopoly. In the memo, they were urging the government to allow them to issue other licenses and let scientists have access to real world cannabis. And it was the DOJ and the Attorney General that ordered the DEA to stand down, stop bringing this up, and they will let them know when they will green light this. So interestingly, I know we have a lot of feelings about the DEA. I certainly have, they've had a very problematic, horrific history, but I will tell you that now I think the DEA is evolving, and our interactions with them have actually been really positive, collaborative. They have worked as true partners with us on this research and manufacturing. They're not what I used to, my perceptions of them have changed a lot. And I think that we have a new enemy that I never understood fully, but I think the FDA is the real cancer here. And they are doing everything possible to make sure that whole plant botanical medicine does not have an easy pathway into ever getting FDA approval or, so this is I don't know if you can see these. This is my team of, my team. You can see this is the 3 judges standing you can't see them, but they're at the top. This was all our court hearings were on Zoom because it was the middle of COVID. So we were dealing with them on there. And then you can see finally, we broke through. DEA ends up issuing a license to us and eventually to, I think we're up to 5 other manufacturers now. But as Burl said, most of these people are not growers. So I want to just emphasize one thing today. If you're worried, if anybody, because I've heard industry people come up to me and think that these DEA licenses are meaningful, like that they can actually take over the industry someday. Please don't ever believe that, because the investor, what's happened now is these 5 other companies are not scientists. They're not growers. These are money people. Most of the companies are run by hedge fund guys, MBAs who really view these licenses as a ticket to get on the NASDAQ. And that's what they've done. So many of you probably saw this company, Bright Green, got on the NASDAQ. It's claiming we're the first American plant touching company on the exchange. They managed to get E.F. Hutton to navigate them onto the exchange with no license, by the way. Bright Green had an application in front of the DEA. They had no revenue. Their stocks soared to $30 a share with nothing. And now they're, I don't know, you can look them up, BGXX. I think they're like $1 a share, but it's just so frustrating because the people who need to be growing for research, who should be supplying our clinical trials are not the people at the table. And it's very sad. So I just want you to know that do not fear these people. They are not interested in ever growing anything. They're just interested in getting the piece of paper that they can leverage with investors. And some of these companies have raised, over $20 million just with the notion that some of them are actually trying to dupe investors to believe that they will be the first to grow cannabis once there's federal legalization, that those licenses will immediately convert it. That's nonsense. There is absolutely nothing in that license that will ever allow them to grow. This is strictly for research, and it's very, the way the contract is written with the DEA is that would be absolutely unattainable. So please know that. So you can see here, there was a lot of coverage of us breaking this monopoly and finally getting going. But I wanted to show you, when I got this contract, I was like, oh, this is awful. It was just pages and pages of legalese and I was like, and then they're charging me like $350 a kilo. The DEA adds this fee because of the international treaty. And I was like, God, this is so ridiculous. How are we going to afford this? We're a nonprofit. And then suddenly I just kind of sat back for a second and I said, oh my God, I'm looking at this and it says you have, at 10 days after harvest, you have to contact the DEA. They have to come there and take possession of the cannabis. They actually buy the cannabis from me and then they sell it to the scientists who need it. So they function as a middleman. So I'm not involved in money laundering or something. So I was like, I just had this revelation. I was like, oh my God, I'm selling weed to the DEA. I was like so excited. Yes. This is an incredible turn of events here. So I was pretty excited about all that then, but it's turned out that this is very difficult, and I have tons of respect for you guys. I'm not a farmer, and I we're trying to learn how to do this. And so I didn't expect to bring this up. I'm wrapping up now, but I want to just say I didn't expect to share this with you, but I think it's important for you to know that we are not capable of growing at a scale that would really have an impact on this system right now. Like, we've grown our first round of cultivation, we grew 48 kilos in grow tents in our building. And initially, by the way, I didn't get to show you a picture, but we're in an old log cabin. The DEA approved us to manufacture in this tiny log kits. We're growing in bedrooms and bathrooms, just like the illicit growers. I love that. So, and we're trying our best. We've issued, we used what we could. We've issued the rest to, researcher at Yale got a kilo, a researcher at UC Denver got 9 kilos. But, we're not really going to be able to do this long term. At this point, we've moved on to other licenses now. We managed to push the DEA to give us the first psilocybin mushroom license. So now thank you guys. So excited because, all the mushroom studies so far, if you see the psilocybin data is all around synthetic psilocybin, nothing on natural mushrooms. So it's really important to us, the veterans, that we study whole mushroom, the full expression of the mushroom. And so we're working on finding ways to, standardize that so we can get into a clinical trial with the whole goodness of the mushroom. But, and we also just recently got approved to manufacture LSD, which is not a part of our charitable mission. I know, I'm excited about that because the veterans, even though, like I said, we like to focus on whole plant and whole mushroom, but in this case, we made an exception to synthesize LSD because the veterans were reporting such extraordinary responses for their alcoholism, other issues, were really benefiting from it. So we're really eager to try to put that through the paces of a clinical trial. And I just want to just mention one last thing as I end here. Keep an eye out. I'm hoping in the next year, I was able to have a very special experience with my mom. As I told you, we were in practice together for 20 years. When she developed an advanced dementia, I was able to acquire from the veterans community, which has a huge underground network of LSD, mushrooms, cannabis. They were teaching my mom how to microdose all these materials at the end of her life. And we were able to capture a lot of this on video. And I think it's going to I hope that her story will be an important vehicle to teaching, especially the elderly population who's, often terrified of these materials, that, cannabis was really the backbone of her treatment with the dementia. And she had almost no sundowning. She never took any pharmaceuticals, just relied heavily on cannabis throughout the day and night, and some microdosing of mushrooms and LSD. And we had a beautiful year. And I'm hoping that we can use this like little documentary to teach people how to have a good death and how to have a special interaction with that they don't have to be sedated on pharmaceuticals for the remainder of their life. So I'm very excited. So you'll see this. Hopefully, the Cohen Foundation just said that they were going to hopefully pay for it's very minimal to put this together. So and then I think this is about the end of it. And then I'll just tell you, just for the upcoming things, this is truly my last slide. For upcoming studies that we're doing, our most urgent study, which should be starting by the end of the year, is, and just to speak about states that have the guts to take money out of their their sales tax revenue and put it into research. Michigan in their rec ballot initiative, they assigned $40 million. So they're giving $20 million each year for 2 years to veterans cannabis research. And my sponsor, MAPS, and we got a $13 million grant to study 320 veterans in 3 sites. So I'm going to be the PI on the study. My lab in Arizona will be the lead. And then there's 2 other sites. You're not going to believe this. For the first time ever, we've got 2 VA hospitals that have agreed to be a clinical trial site. So they're going to be studying. Yeah. Can you believe it was such an achievement for us, because we've never been able to get cooperation from the VAs, and certainly never have agreed to do a study looking at smoked and vaporized cannabis flower. And thank God we're going to be using real world cannabis for the first time ever. And we're going to get these VAs to host the trial on their campus. So it's the Tampa VA and the Ann Arbor VA have agreed to join in this. So we're going to be splitting the enrollment. We'll each enroll about 100 veterans. And then that data will certainly be able to be used by, but I just want to point out, look at Michigan assigns $40 million to veterans cannabis research. It's already been allocated. You're going to be able to hopefully see that data soon, but that just shows you can bring that information to your legislature and show them that, what high-minded states are doing to, I didn't mean to make that high-minded, that there is a path for states to do this and get to catapult yourselves to the forefront of some of the most important research in the world. If you assign that kind of, even close to half of that to cannabis research in Washington, you are going to be at the very forefront of the most important science in the world. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate your time.
Why don't I just use this one? Thank you so much again, Sue. You are so awesome. You are even more my hero now than you were before.